para sa...
Good afternoon, everyone. I think we can begin. So, good afternoon again and welcome to the second talk in our Sustainability Lecture Series organized by the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability. My name is Abby Avis. I'm the coordinator for Campus Sustainability under the AIS. And on behalf of Dr. Kirjeng, our director, we welcome you to today's talk, which is a very special talk indeed because we are also being broadcasted live streamed through the Ateneo IPTV. So thank you very much to Ateneo IPTV. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today in the interesting topic that we will be discussing. He's an associate professor of philosophy and is currently the acting dean of the School of Humanities. He has a doctoral degree from the Munich School of Philosophy, and his research interests include Heidegger, technology, language, the city, environment, and translation. Currently, he is involved in an interdisciplinary research project on human dwelling in a disaster-prone city, and today he will be discussing with us how we design our spaces and what our spaces mean to us. Please help me welcome Dr. Remmon Barbaza.
And thanks to all of you for coming to this afternoon's exchange. I'm hoping this will be an interesting and productive exchange. I learned a lot also from especially the open forum. So, let's begin. Just a few preliminary remarks. First, the original version of this talk. You might be wondering, what's a philosopher doing talking about design? I know nothing about design. It seems that philosophers get into all sorts of topics. That's the way we keep ourselves employed. And especially with the new CHEG curriculum, our employment is in danger. So we're trying very hard. But anyway, so originally I presented this to this event, month-long, or more than a month. That's, June, July, August, 4 months in St. Denis. They invited me to give this talk. So it's the Museum of Contemporary Art and Design. So that was from last month. But I modified substantially the talk because the audience there was different, design students. Now I know I'm in front of Ateneans who are philosophers. How many are still in first or second year? Okay, so maybe not yet. Soon you will be philosophers in the Ateneo tradition. A second preliminary remark, especially since a lot of you have not yet done philosophy. A lot of what we will discuss this afternoon will depend on language and will happen in language. Concretely, we will dig up etymologies, origin of words. I happen to have worked on a philosopher called Heidegger, as Abby said earlier, and he's quite notorious for always playing with words. They say he's a magician of words. He's pulling our legs. He does etymological tricks. Well, language is not the topic of our for this afternoon's talk, but just maybe a few questions that you can take home with you when you think of language. We will get into a problem if we think of language simply as a tool, or as an instrument, or as a means of communication. Heidegger was famous for having said, "It is not we human beings who speak, it is language that speaks." Of course, no, that's very difficult to accept, right? And then he says another rather scandalous or preposterous remark. He said, who will tell us the nature of a thing? If you ask what is democracy, what is earth, what is life, who tells us the nature of a thing? He says language. Again, just there's no way we can get hold of that claim. But if you think about when you go home, some of the in your idle time here in campus, for instance, I don't know whether it ever occurred to you to ask, how did language originate? Did it start by separate vocabulary items? The problem of the origin of language is one of the most difficult problems that linguists, not just philosophers, linguists have to deal with, and then they don't have any answer. And I don't think there will ever be an answer to that. It remains to be a mystery. If someone here, for instance, makes the claim, the only thing that's real is matter. The only thing that's real is material. Okay. Everything else is abstraction. It's just, philosophers add, hindi magdagdag to keep themselves employed, right? But if you think about it, to make that claim, the only thing that's real is matter. That claim is made through language, through the use of words. What do you mean by matter? What is real? But anyway, so as I said, just a few hints about language. Another one is philosophical claim. Most of you are still in your second year. You will be experiencing philosophy only next year. But I think all of you have heard of perhaps the most famous quotation in our passage in philosophy. That would be an unexamined life is not worth living. Maybe you've heard of that. Or what else? I think therefore I am. No. These are philosophical claims. Now, the nature of philosophical claims is such that there's no way you can prove them. How can you prove that an unexamined life is not worth living? Maybe you can go via negativa and say, okay, I will live my life without examining, without reflection, and see what happens. But then maybe it's too late. When you reach your old age and then you say, oh man, that's right. So, the nature of philosophical claims, Heidegger also was saying, proving is useless in philosophy. You can prove just about anything depending on your premise. So, the certainty in philosophy is quite different from the certainty that we find in other disciplines. Like when Ninoy came home from the US, you can imagine he must have had a very serious discussion with Corey, negotiating. He was having a good life in Boston, teaching in Harvard. But for him to come to a decision and returning to the Philippines with such certainty, and then he said, the Filipino is worth dying for. He was so certain that he was willing to give up his life. What sort of certainty is that? That certainty is what we might call, as Jaspers called it, inner certainty. The kind of inner certainty that Martin Luther also, when he made a major decision that was historical, left the Catholic Church, and then I first heard this from Father Fariol's famously posted thesis on the cathedrals, the churches, and he said, "Hier stehe ich kann nicht anders. Here I stand, I cannot do otherwise." Wow, such certainty. And we arrive at such certainties in our lives. So this would be, I will be making claims later on, as I've said, there's no way to prove them, right? But whether it hits you, it resonates with you, that's the level of certainty that we're looking for. And then space. Of course, we'll be talking about space. Again, what is space? you can. One time I met a physicist in Munich at Sunday Mass, and after Sunday, I don't know what got into my head. I was a bit naughty that morning, but I asked him, what is space? That was, I lost a friend that morning, a potential friend. But then he told me, why am I asking what is space? And I said, there, everywhere. I said, where? I don't see space. I see trees, I see cars, I see people. I see buses and waiting sheds, but where is space? As I said, that was our first and final conversation. But if you think about it, well, I tried to look for the coordinates of Faber Hall, where we are right now, according to Google Maps. These are our coordinates. 14.6 degrees north, right now, 121 degrees east. Now, I ask you, does any one of you experience actually these coordinates? Can you tell yourself, right now I'm experiencing, I'm actually 14 degrees north? Right? Nobody, right? This is an abstraction. I'm not saying it's not true. It's true, but it's true for its own purposes, right? I often ask my students also, how many of you know the dimensions of your table at home? Maybe I can ask you, how many of you know the exact dimensions of your dining table? No one knows. We don't need to know, right? Now, what conceivable reason could there be for you to need to measure the dimensions of your table? Anyone from the audience? If you imagine, what situation might force you or might necessitate the taking of the measurement of your table? Yes? Yes? Good. If you want to move the table to another room, you have to make sure it fits through the door. What else? Maybe you need to buy a tablecloth, right? You need to get the right measurements. When you do those measurements, you are extracting the dimensions of the table. You are abstracting, right? So in that sense, the measurement is abstract. But the concrete experience of the table is not the dimensions. The table is that maybe piece of wood around which your family gathers for dinner, around which memories are made, right? That's the concrete. We always draw from the concrete experience. Now, as you might have seen in the announcement of this talk, I make a preliminary claim. Designing spaces solely or primarily in terms of aesthetic appeal and technical ingenuity often leaves us cold and disoriented. As I've said, that's a claim. I have no way of proving that. But maybe you have some idea. Sometimes I'm in a place that's so nice looking, but somehow it leaves me cold, right? Or high-tech, but still I don't feel at home. One fundamental reason for this, as Albert Borgman, I'm sorry I made a mistake in the announcement, it's not Alan Borgman, but Albert Borgman, suggests is the forgetting of focal things and practices. So this is what we'll focus on, focus. So this is from the book, Technology and the Character of Contemporary Life, a Philosophical Inquiry by Albert Borgman. 1984, and one chapter towards the end has the title Focal Things and Practices. And he says this is characteristic of the contemporary condition of us human beings. We're losing a sense of focus. I remember the philosophy department, we organized, I forget now which international conference. One of the foreign participants immediately came to me and asked, "Where's the city center?" And I looked at my colleagues, "Where's the city center?" He's German from Europe. Their instinct when they go to the city is to ask for the center. Where's the center? Megamall. So people ask also, if you're a UP student and you want to have a souvenir photograph before you graduate, where do you go? Ablation, everyone knows. What about in Ateneo? Different answers. Father Del Costa, just St. Ignatius. We don't have a clear center. The architect Paulo Alcazaren also mentioned to me once when he saw the statue of Father de la Costa, he said, it's not placed correctly where it's placed right now. It looks like, because there's a driveway, right? It looks like he's waiting for a GP ride. He should be placed appropriately, proper to his person and the history behind his life. So let's focus on the word focus. Well, as already in the announcement, focus actually comes from the Latin, which is also focus, but it means hearth or stove. Now, what on earth does the stove have to do with focus? Right? It's so far from how we understand focus these days. How we focus, right? Focus on your exam, focus on your personal life, on your career, right? But it meant hearth. It meant stove. Language. It's mysterious. We did not invent it. Right? And in the meantime, it keeps us philosophers employed. The hearth is quite related to the German word Herd, which means stove. So you see that the connection. You know that English is a Germanic language. So what is it about the stove that makes it the focal point of human existence? We can replace the stove with the kitchen. Somebody told me that, or I must have read somewhere, maybe an architecture book, the biggest investment one makes after the house itself is the kitchen. The most expensive. After the house itself is the kitchen. Space, what you need to get it all built, it's the kitchen. Another thing, somebody made a remark, maybe I forget, maybe Albert Borkman. In most TV, maybe not just American TV shows, sitcoms, most of the scenes happen in either the kitchen or the dining room, right? And usually the dining room is adjacent to the kitchen. There's something about the kitchen that we tend to be drawn towards, right? And we tend to gather around the kitchen. So maybe we could, and we know how important it is for families, not just to eat, to share a meal, to be there at table together, but also to be together in the preparation of food. Right? So maybe we can say not only that the family that prays together stays together, but maybe we can say also the family that eats together without texting. Or the family that prepares the food together, right? Stays together. There's something about the kitchen. And well, and I find it wonderful that even for Christians, Jesus chose the symbol of the bread and the breaking, right? Close to the stove, close to the kitchen, right? The Eucharist is the celebration around the table. So what is it about the kitchen that makes us gather around it? maybe we can ask ourselves at home, do I help out in the preparation? Do I actually, am I one with my family members? And we can see what difference it makes to actually do that, right? And even between couples, between husbands and wives, they say, live streaming marathon. If husbands want to earn pogi points, all they need to do is to help in the kitchen. And not just wait for food to be served, right? That's so sexist. Now, how about design? Design is from, again, Latin, designare, to designate. And designate, in turn, comes from the word signum, a mark. So design is a mark. It marks the dimensions of our lives. When it comes to space and design, and we think of the kitchen, stove, what does the kitchen teach us? So let's talk about our kitchens. But how many of you actually like being in your kitchens? Not too many hands, okay, but maybe half. It's okay. The sun is raising her hand. It's a warm and cozy place, right? Have you ever heard of the kitchen door triangle? You just Google kitchen door triangle and you'll find this triangle, and it's usually refrigerator, stove, and sink. And you have to configure your kitchen in such a way that mobility, movement, these are the three major parts. Of course, in the absence of the refrigerator, what do you have? In pre-electricity or in pantry or, well, yeah, cupboard. I lived for more than 4 years in a place in Albay when my family moved there all the time from Laguna, in a place without electricity. So I distinctly remember in lieu of refrigerator, you have this cupboard where you store food. But this will always be the three: refrigerator, or storage, sink, and stove. And a kitchen is good if the movement is smooth, right? I hope my father is not watching the live stream. But when I was doing my PhD in Munich, of course, it's the land of Solingen, right? Of this sought after knives. So my wife and I, despite the fact that we didn't have much money, decided to get us invest in knives. Might as well, we're here anyway. And then we saw on sale 4-star Solingen knives. Said, okay, this is it, let's get it. And then I told my mother, do you also want a set of 4-star Solingen knives? Then, not interested. But he was more interested in taking home, I don't know what they call this, a stove that's like a glass. Is that porcelain? Like it's that flat. Ceramic ba yan? Yeah. Anyway, he wanted to have something that's actually more of a, I hope he's not watching, more of a show off, right? And then I saw this stove at home, never used. I'm talking about this because if you ask some chefs, if you ask them what's the most important tool in the kitchen, some of the big chefs would say knife, and they guard the knife really really well. And others would say, of course, you just need pot, no intricate, no elaborate tools. So. In other words, what I'm saying here is that if you think about a kitchen, a good kitchen is a simple kitchen. Of course, in the Philippines we have the phenomenon of dirty kitchen, right? So there is kitchen for show, which is clean, and the dirty kitchen, where the real thing, the real action happens, right? Maybe that's another talk altogether in the future. But anyway, these are some, I just Googled earlier, kitchen triangle, and you get all these different configurations. So, when you think of the kitchen work triangle, there is focus, right? The focus is work, and the focus is actually being able to cook, right? So if you think of the stove or the kitchen, we can think of these characteristics: practicality, efficiency, access, simplicity, community, as I've said, because people tend to gather around or in the kitchen. Mobility, there should be good movement. Health, everything that's in the kitchen must be healthy or must contribute to a healthy life. One of the things that happen when you get married is that you learn to distinguish between chopping board for vegetables and chopping board for meat. That you don't confuse the two. Amazing things we learn in the kitchen. Sustenance. Of course, we know that the kitchen is the one that sustains us. So when we think of designing spaces, we cannot but think of the things we need to put in that space, right? Should I put a high-tech stove? That's a nice refrigerator that looks retro and with a nice pastel color. Do I need that? These are decisions that we need to make in the kitchen. What things are we going to put within that space? That's part of the design, right? Now the thing with things, okay, this is my philosopher mode. No more designer mode. Of course, this is from Heidegger. He speaks of the thing of the thing. But before you all go out, because we're talking crazy here now, a little patience. The German word for a thing is Ding. And Heidegger makes a verb out of that. Das Ding, dingt. In English, the thing, things. The thing in Latin is res. If you think of the word republic, res publica, it actually means the matter, the thing that brings the city together. Now I place there other examples. Descartes, famously in his meditations, he was meditating on a ball of wax, and he was asking, the ball of wax is near the fireplace. After a while, the ball of wax melts. And then being the philosopher that he is, and a geometrician at that, and Jesuit trained at that, he asks in the end, if the ball of wax melts in the end, loses all its characteristics, smell, touch, etc., is it still the same ball of wax? All the properties are gone. Descartes was forced to conclude, it's just res extensa. It's a thing that's extended in space. What happened there? The ball of wax was completely abstracted from the concrete experience of, let's say, the ball of wax as what you use for candle. And it was completely translated into geometric terms, XY coordinates. The ball of wax is simply an extended thing. I distinctly remember in college I lived in a dorm. I don't know what quarrel I got into with my roommate, who was a math major. And then he got so irritated and said, "Do you want me to reconfigure your face mathematically?" He already made combinations. But anyway, I told you earlier that in German, as in Latin, Ding, res, the thing is what gathers. Heidegger distinguishes between thing and object. Like a table at home is a genuine thing if it gathers the family. Heidegger says to live a truly human life, we only need a few things in life. But our contemporary age is flooded with objects. A sea of objects that have nothing to do with human life. Like, our cell phones, we all know that, right? A cell phone becomes obsolete even before it's introduced to the market. Right? What sort of a thing is that? Now, interestingly, in our language, bagay, the same insight. What is it about the Filipino word bagay that speaks of belonging together? What do we say? Yes?
Bagay.
Sorry?
Bagay.
Bagay. Bagay tayong lahat dito sa Faber Hall. O hindi bagay ang magpajama sa oral exam. So we speak of bagay as thing also in the sense of belonging, of what is appropriate. And when we speak of appropriateness, appropriate, we speak of owning. Proprietor is own. So bagay means to belong. So, a wonderful insight from our language, ang bagay ay may binabagayan. Hindi kahit ano pwede. We'll see that later. So, the thing tells us about, the thing points to appropriateness. The thing points to what is proper. But bagay ay kung ano ang bagay. What is one's own? When I say, nababagay ito, hindi ito nababagay, this doesn't belong here, they don't fit together. It speaks of what belongs. So design is about belongingness. It's not just about aesthetically pleasing. When we make a design, then we have to consider our belongingness. Katipunan is being redesigned, right? Again, we all know that, right? From U-turn, now intersection. I just live in a village about 600 meters from Ateneo. But when the U-turn system was imposed, all of a sudden, Ateneo felt so far. I don't belong anymore. And Ateneo felt so far. So the way we configure, whether we decide to put up a high-rise building, a flyover, whether we decide to use cars or bicycles or just walk, all these things have repercussions about the fittedness or belonging together of the things we put when we design spaces. So this, when you read literature and technology, for instance, we will hear about appropriate technology. What is appropriate technology? Most of you here were not just students of Ateneo when we decided to go up against SM residences, right? The SM Blue. Because this has a zoning, this is a particular residential zone, right? And according to the zone, hindi bagay. That's a thing. That's my timer, sorry. How much time do I have? Okay. We're up to 6, right? Okay. Anyway, we'll have maybe at least half an hour of exchange. So we know that the zone in this area, I forget now, what's the maximum number of floors again? Opi? Something like...
6 for the...
Sorry, no, in this zone. And SM residence is something like 42, right? So when we protested against that, the protest assumes that hindi bagay. Hindi bagay. It does not belong. We also hear of human scale technology. So when people ask, what is appropriate technology? It means what is according to our scale as human beings. So, you know, in science, strictly speaking, there's nothing near or far. In science, it's just in different points in space, right? That's why coordinate. Strictly speaking, also, there's nothing big or small. Strictly speaking, in science, right? They're just relative, right? But then when we speak of human scale, what is appropriate to ourselves as human beings, then we think of us. Ano yung nababagay sa atin? When I was researching on big dams, for instance, I chanced upon a site in the internet. There's an international organization on big dams, which was put up early 20th century, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And then I tried to look, what is their definition of a big dam? I forget now, that's something like 2 or 3 stories. If it's 2 or 3 stories high, it's now considered a big dam. And then you have to ask, how big is big? Of course, the title of my talk alludes to this book, Small is Beautiful, The Study of Economics as If People Matter. So, the subtitle of my talk is from this, Designing Spaces as If We Were Humans. This was widely read in the early 70s, and then became less popular. But then, in the recent years, there's a resurgence of interest in, as I've said, small-scale technology, appropriate technology, human-scale technology. There's all this stuff of let's go small again, abandon mega productions, mega structures. So we're trying to find really what design is appropriate for us. In this book, for instance, Schumacher, well, he's an economist. He said an ideal size for a city population is something like 1.3 million. I don't know how he came up with that number. But, well, I lived in Munich for 4 years, and the population of Munich is 1.3 million. And I felt, to some extent, the quality of life if you have a city with only 1.3 million. Except that during Oktoberfest, it balloons to 7.5 million, 7.3, with all the tourists coming for beer. But anyway, so back to the kitchen. So there's really a lot more going on in the kitchen than what we think. You have all these aspects, not just aesthetic, moral, political. If all our rice are being imported, our farmers in the provinces must be in trouble, right? Of course, scientific, religious also, a lot of things going on in the kitchen. We never ask where our food is coming from. In my class, especially in philosophy of technology, I will usually show the documentary film Food Incorporated. I urge you to watch that, although if you watch that, you might not want to eat anymore anywhere. You know that in the US, something like 96 or 97% of all chickens are injected with arsenicals, and only something like 4 or 5 years ago, finally FDA banned arsenicals, although they've known it all along. So when we analyze the kitchen on so many levels, what sort of food do we eat? What sort of things do we put in the kitchen? All these aspects become relevant. So I think we're getting a sense now that space is never indifferent. It's not just points in XY coordinates, at least for us human beings. But then how else do we experience space other than as humans? As I've said, nobody experiences here the coordinates of Faber Hall, right? But how do we experience space? We experience space in terms of near or far, right? Nearness, as I said, strictly speaking in science, there's neither near nor far. And yet when we ask ourselves, is my experience of nearness then not real? Of course it is, right? When your friend is suddenly, you can be just a chair away from your best friend, but after a quarrel, it feels like 1,000 miles apart, right? That's a real human experience, right? We do experience space primarily in terms of nearness, of distance. Now, this was a book that was quite widely read more than since in the mid-1990s. Non-Places: An Introduction to Supermodernity. I will show you why I will refer to this book. And another one by Zygmunt Bauman, a sociologist, that speaks of liquid modernity. Our age is the age where there's nothing fixed. There's a constant movement, not just in terms of space, but even between, let's say, genders, nationalities, borders. And Bauman uses the image of liquid as that which characterizes our age. Now, this is from Non-Place. I'll just read that. These places have at least 3 characteristics in common. They want to be, people want them to be, places of identity, of relations, and of history. The layout of the house, the rules of residence, the zoning of the village, the placement of altars, configuration of public open spaces, land distribution correspond for every individual to a system of possibilities, prescriptions, and intrigues whose content is both spatial and social. To be born is to be born in a place, to be assigned a residence. You're too young to be able to experience something very emotional when the old Coleco building was torn down. But I know my wife was in tears because she used to, that's an important place for them. Do you think you will cry if Mega Mall is torn down? You see, we react to places and structures and buildings differently because of this identity, relations, and history. Right? This is selfie, my bike selfie. That's my bike, which my former student sold to me. This is all too familiar, right? This is Katipunan at 9 a.m. 2 weeks ago, I think. what is happening to our space when we cannot reach a destination that's just 200 meters within 15 minutes. Sometimes you get stuck for 2 hours reaching a destination that's just 600 or 200 meters away. Something must be wrong with the way we design our space. So when I take my bike over the footbridge, I say, I'm above the rest. Okay, only because I can afford a car. Okay. Have you seen this picture? I posted this on Facebook, so my friends on Facebook must have seen this. But you can guess. What's that orange lane? It's a bike lane. Can you imagine? Wow. This is in Denmark. In Copenhagen, where bicycles outnumber people, nearly 40% of residents cycle to work. Bike-friendly infrastructure is key. So I'm saying this because we cannot, in Ateneo, we cannot just think of design, of sustainability without the larger picture, right? Because if we don't, we can only do so at our own risk. Because when we get out of Ateneo, we get stuck in traffic, right? So what do you think does the design of our campus tell us about ourselves? I don't know. Have you ever thought of this? Okay, this is couple books again. I sketched this and posted this on Facebook. I'm not a designer, I'm not an urban planner. But I said, this is categorized, game 3, 2.1. I said, what if we had the drop-off point? So cars don't need to go get in, you just drop passengers. And then when you get off, you have shuttle Egypts, each rides bicycle waiting. Because we have drop-off points in Jesu, in the Rizal Life, in almost everywhere. Why don't we have a drop-off point considering Ateneo as one place, right? Now, we don't have this. What does this tell us? We are privileging cars. This campus privileges cars. And we're suffering from it right now. Again, design. Remember the kitchen work triangle? Mobility. Right? There's something wrong because we get stuck somewhere. Of course, the problem is huge, right? And there's no way this talk, or there's no amount of philosophy or whatever course here in Ateneo can solve it. But we need to take some steps, and other countries are doing that right now. I've posted this also on my Facebook. This must be familiar to you. This is a photograph of a mass being held in the new wing of Shangri-La. I've always been fascinated by masses in malls. And I wrote, Mass in a Mall, 13 May 2013, taken with my phone, East Wing of Shangri-La, Plaza Edsa, Mandaluyong, Metro Manila. I've always found the sight of masses held in malls to be thought-provoking. How the blurring of distinctions between spaces and places often happens in the city, between the sacred and the profane, between worship and leisure. How the mall has been described as a non-place, like the book non-place I showed it earlier, where one loses a sense of center, or even a sense of time, right? You don't even know that it rained right when you're in the mall, if not even changes in the weather. A priest friend once told me, and we had a lengthy argumentation, because he would say Mass in malls. He said, that's where the people are. So I say Mass in all because that's where they are. Jesuits do that, right? Where the people are, we go there, right? I wonder if they say Mass in Boracay because Ateneans are during summer. Maybe he's right, or could he be? Are we not perhaps losing something important when we are no longer compelled to take off our sandals upon entering a holy ground. Even Nietzsche himself, the self-proclaimed Antichrist, could not stand the all too casual relationship some people have with their colleagues, saying, "After du stehen mit dem Gott." This very familiar relationship with God, you can't stand it, and he's the Antichrist. Can you imagine that? Meanwhile, once in a while, I still find myself in malls. In this very long place, there is much that remains thought-provoking. Again, this is not a question of being too conservative. I'm far from being conservative. I remember one case again in Glorieta. The priest, this is a mass again, the priest was holding the body of Christ. And then beside, on both sides are huge posters of underwear, like a bench. So these are different bodies being being raised, sorry. And I was struck by that sign, the blurring of distinctions. And I got into another a very engaging exchange with another judge who said, "But God transcends. You can say Mass anywhere. God transcends." But I said, "Okay, why don't you use a styrofoam instead of a chalice for the Mass, right? Can you imagine a styrofoam cup being used at Mass? Hindi bagay, not appropriate. They don't belong together." So in the same way as things must be appropriate, in the same way spaces must be designed with this in mind. You don't go to a funeral straight from a basketball game, right, in your basketball shorts, right? That would not be proper. So there is so much of the political that goes on in the kitchen. As I said, just one look at the kitchen and you can think of land reform. Right? Why is the rice solely, mainly from Vietnam? What's happening to our farmers in the provinces? Right? Why is the garlic from, again, Vietnam, but Thailand? And if you look at Metro Manila, the reason why the space is congested, that has to do with politics, right? Distribution of wealth. We cannot ignore that when we design spaces, because that, the place will be congested and congested. So much that is political, so much that is spiritual, so much that is existential, so much that is human that happens in the kitchen. We cannot design spaces as if we were not political. We cannot design spaces as if it does not involve justice. We cannot design spaces as if we were not human. Now, I might get into trouble here because I was invited by the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability, right? But I have a problem with the term sustainable development. My problem is the word development is so loaded already. When we think of development, we think of the developed countries, and we follow their path, right? Somebody did some calculation that if we were to live, if our quality of life is to be patterned after North America, the rich nations, we would need something like 2 or 3 Earths to sustain that kind of life, right? So we have to rethink about development, right? Up north, Ateneo has been protesting against APECO, for instance. There's another development project going on there, right? And again, a reconfiguration of space. But that's another story. As I said, so, I don't know. Maybe the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability will not invite me again. But I am taking my chance now. But my suggestion is, instead of that sustainable way of life, right? Neutrality way of life, right? If you think of some communities in different parts of the world who refuse to go the way of development, that's their choice, right? And you wouldn't say that they're backwards. That's their way of life, right? I had the privilege of climbing Banawe. This is Patad. Don't ever grow old without going to Patad. One of the most beautiful places that you can ever see in your life. You need to hike something like 15 kilometers from the main town. I have a slight acrophobia, so this is a feat for me. How old are the terraces? Who knows? Something like 5,000 years at time. And you know, when we walked the terraces, I could see the water still flowing. They did marvelous marvelous irrigation system. Appropriate technology, human scale, and something that belongs to their history. So by way of conclusion, since we could have some time for exchange, where are we headed? Oftentimes art helps us see. So a colleague of mine shared this with me, a painting by this artist named Michael Carhu, who warns of dire consequences in the future if the way we design our cities, our spaces or places remain the same. These are his paintings. God forbid we'd still be alive when this thing becomes a reality. Actually, there are real photographs. There are photographs really like this. No? The cars that have not been sold, I've seen pictures of that actually look like this. Wow. EDSA in the future. Another imagination of the artist. Now, do you think artists are just a little too uptight? They need to loosen up a bit. Are they too negative in their prediction of the future? Think again. This is a photograph from the 1950s, which I got from the National Geographic. Fiction, reality, where's the difference? Whenever I look at this photograph, I'm always stunned by what we're doing to this place we call Earth. Now, after Fukushima, Germany decided to shut down all nuclear reactors within 10 years. That's a major decision. Of course, when you think of the kitchen, you think of the energy also, what you use, what fuel. But so I said, these have very important political repercussions and decisions that have to be made. Now, this one, Hamburg is planning to make cars superfluous in the next 15 to 20 years now. Hamburg is building such an ambitious infrastructure that in a decade or two, residents may never have to get in their cars again. So they're redesigning their cities with mobility in mind, actual mobility. There's a book which I ordered, and Rizal Library was quick in actually purchasing them. It's a book by sociologists, Anti-Automobility. It's a book, different scholars writing about cars, and their position is anti-automobility. But you see, even without that, you have cities already planning for the future with this in mind. So this is a map of Hamburg. So I end with, this is a painting by this French painter, The Table in the Kitchen. So I just, maybe, whenever we experience disorientation, or getting lost, or getting bewildered by our common condition in this age of ours, maybe we just have to go to the kitchen and revive a sense of simplicity, practicality, and efficiency. The kitchen has a lot to tell us. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Barbaza, for that very thought-provoking talk, which I hope raises, I'm sure raises questions that are bagay or appropriate to think about in our times. Questions that we can now address. So we have about 20 minutes for the open forum. We have 2 mics in the audience. So if you have anything that you are uncertain about and would like to ask, or anything you are certain about and would like to share, now's the time. Yes, please.
Hi, Kendra classmate, former classmate. Sir, I'd like to share, in UP there's an organization called ANIDO. I don't know, is anybody from the Cordilleras here? Or Igorot or Ifugao? The organization is named after the fire. The term anido is the fire or the bonfire around which the elders gather in a circle, which they call the Pai or the Payan. So I guess somebody can also further share the Payan. Vertical Cordillera or you're familiar? Yeah. So they use that concept as something that the elders, when they have a meeting or when they have something to discuss politically, that the Payan is a consultation space. And they include the children in that meeting, in that consultation. As far as I understand from where the concept of their anido and the Payan is. So I don't know, maybe it's related to that, or it's an indigenous, one of our indigenous terms that is similar to the concept of hearth or stove.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, ito ba?
Hi, Momo. This is a very nice lecture. What struck me is the point regarding the lack of a center in Metro Manila. This somehow relates to my own archipelagic study. And I was thinking that perhaps we have a different sense of a center. Like, at the back a while ago, I was discussing quietly with Dr. Calano with regards to what was our center, what was the center of Manila during the olden times. We were actually arguing about Plaza Miranda and Luneta, of course. But I was thinking these places were also designed to be the symbolic centers of power. So I'd like to think we have a different sense of a center, and it's actually resurfacing in our cities. Like we don't have much care for the centers which are particularly designed in the pueblo structure. Like wala tayong masyadong pagmamalasakit halimbawa sa mga bagay na nasa sentro, yung mga lumang bahay, simbahan, o mga gusali. So, feeling ko parang there's a native specter coming along and redefining particular centers. Perhaps we are a culture which has different centers. So, yun lang isip ko.
Sorry, I should have asked if you could kindly introduce yourself. Yes.
Louis Sanchez from the English department.
Thank you, Louis. That's not a planted question. But yeah, that would be really interesting. Just for you to know, the School of Humanities, we have 2 research clusters. One is the city, the other one is the island. And then Louis is interested in the archipelago. So these are interesting inquiries, investigations going on. But listening to what you shared, we don't necessarily have to think of centers in just one way, right? There are different ways, and of course, when you bring in Derrida, the center is not a center. There is no center, but we don't want to get into that. But I think you're pointing to more primordial, more traditional, or forgotten ways of thinking of the center. Precisely, that's what's being threatened right now. When the bell is rung in Ateneo for a mass, let's say Holy Spirit, what do we see in campus? Bodies moving towards the Jesu, right? And I think that's a beautiful sight, right? And you compare it to masses, let's say in malls, right? When your mind is elsewhere and you have your shopping bags, right? And there's no focus on many levels. What I'm saying is that yes, we might be able to discover different ways of thinking of the center, but I think one way or another you will still have this experience of gathering. I was once also in in Laguna, a beautiful town, just about 100 or so, 120 kilometers from south of Manila. And Sunday, when the bell rings, again you see people coming from different directions and congregating to the center. But thank you. That would be an interesting research.
Any questions from our students? Yes, please.
Keith Banania, a student of Sir Louis. Wait, no, I forgot. Why are philosophical assumptions based on definitions, if definitions are like made by man? So would that make them to a certain extent like erroneous?
Like?
Erroneous. Because they're made by man, so there's like a degree of error. If philosophical assumptions are based on like definitions, wouldn't that make them to a certain sense erroneous? Because definitions are made by man, so there's like a sense of error.
Thank you. I think you're ready for philosophy. And you will keep us employed. But if you remember what I said at the beginning, the problem with language, definition is part of language, right? The problem is when we think of language simply as a tool. That we just make definitions out of women. But is that the way it happens? When we say peace, imagine an international conference on peace. And different people from different countries will say peace is this, peace is this, peace is this. Right? All of them, each one of them will make a claim. This is what peace is all about. This is what justice is all about. Each one of them will have to state it in the form of a claim. But if you think closely, where did that definition come from? Did we just invent it? That's really the mystery of language. If you want to be more perplexed even more about it, well, Heidegger would say, in the end, we'll end up with tautology. You know, if you think about the dictionary is tautological. Get one word, you have a definition. That definition will point to other words within the same book, right? So it will move within the same, right? I saw a National Geographic TV episode. It's a series called "Built for the Kill."
Yes.
Right? And animals are being portrayed how sharp, are they built for the kill, they can attack. So the meadow is being portrayed as a war zone, right? Of course we can understand that. They're fighting, right? So a scientist may claim the meadow is not a meadow. the meadow is actually a war zone. Of course, the poet will say, no, the meadow is not a war zone. A meadow is a meadow is a meadow. Right? Hence the poem, a rose is a rose is a rose. You can say, human being, you are bipedal, I don't know, I forget now the size of the brain. You can make all the description, and then you say, no, in the end, we're beyond definition. I am who I am in the Old Testament. But anyway, fascinating.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So that's a taste of Philo 101 for those who are here. You have been baptized, you have been initiated. Any other questions? Yes. Sorry, our lady in green and then our sir with the glasses.
Hi, sir. I'd like to ask something about your shifting from sustainable development to sustainable way of life. So I'm taking a double major in psychology and development studies. So development. I think so I think even in the development sector, we also have that kind of problem, and especially in political development, where we're saying that perhaps development studies as a field may be passé in terms of defining development as development of the West. But I think within the years, through the years, there's actually a lot of people who try to deviate from that and who try to define development as something that is more than the development of the West. So we see here the development of countries like countries from South America and countries like Japan, Korea, Taiwan, who have different brands of development. Well, I think you also pointed out Schumacher. Schumacher might also not agree with the kind of development they have because it's also large scale and not particularly sustainable in his sense. So I do agree that there is some sort of tension or problem with the term sustainable development there. But I also have a problem with a sustainable way of life as a term, because it feels like something that's more personal, that is more small scale, to the point that how are we going to institutionalize things such as a sustainable way of life if it comes more as a personal goal? So if we are going to have development in itself, the institutions and the political institutions are also necessary, I believe, to actually implement a change that is large enough for it to actually be significant in the world arena. So that's my opinion regarding your.
Thank you. As I've said, my only problem with the term is, well, development itself shouldn't be a problem, but I've said it's been loaded already for it to be useful as an expression. But when I think of way of life, I'm not thinking of way of life simply on a personal level. We have a Japanese way of life, we have an Indian way of life, right? When we say, we just don't do that sort of thing here, that's not our way, right? Even Jesuits speak of way of proceeding, right? The Jesuit way of life. So we can think of way of life as not really just personal, but communal. In fact, well, you will do your ethics in your 4th year, and you will read Aristotle, the Nicomachean Ethics. In Book 2, he says, ethos, habit, what we're used to, kabihasnan, what we're used to, habit. Ethos is closely related to ethike. Ethike is moral virtue, and therefore Aristotle says the only way to be just is to keep on doing just acts, right? So a just way of life, right? So a just way of life is not just personal, but involves the habituation of an entire community. That's why I think even our language is kabihasnan, the civilization. It's not just one individual, but an entire community.
Yes, sir.
Hey, sir. Hello, I'm Angelo Perez, a filmmaker. First of all, I apologize because I was late. I just came from a GA of Human Natures. Anyway, I have two questions. First is something about architecture. I'm not sure if you've touched on architecture in your talk, or if you've posed challenges on architecture and urban planning, especially because what I get from the talk is there's some concept of center and we're using that center. So how would you challenge current modes of architecture and urban planning with regards to the center? Sub-question under that is, the title is about the kitchen. I'm curious on how is it related to other forms or to other areas in the house, especially the dining area, because in our class in Philosophy of the City, we've talked about the dining area and in terms of dwelling, the dining area could serve as an example of how we dwell in terms of our table manners, in terms of our etiquette, and our way of conversing around in the table. So that's my first question in terms of some architecture of the house, or in more general terms in urban planning. Then my second question, sir, is on non-places. We've read both about non-places, and I'm looking at is it possible to look at non-places like airports or malls? Are they places that have no center? So you go. Thank you.
Bigat na. Yeah, as I said, when we look at the kitchen and expand it to the level of the city, I think the same principles will work. You will have to look at mobility. Urban planners, thinkers of the city, they have some metrics. Like grocery store should not be more than 200 meters away from your house. Therefore, you can walk towards your grocery. If it's farther than that, there's something wrong with the design of the town or the city. Right? They have some metrics also about what sort of ingredients you're going to use in the kitchen. Are most of your ingredients imported? If they are, then that will have very serious repercussions, not just in the economy, but the people who produce local ingredients or raise crops. Although somebody mentioned the Marco Polo principle or exception. If a commodity has been traded for centuries already, like, I don't know, olive oil, then, or coffee, which is not necessarily native to a particular place, then that's part of it. But I think the point is the majority of the ingredients should be locally sourced. And if it's not, there's something terrible going on. And repercussions in justice, in distribution of wealth, and yeah. If you think, why are people all flocking to Metro Manila? That's not just a question of course it's a question of congestion, but there's a real indication something terrible is going on in this land, that people are coming together here. There's no life. And most economists, even our economics professors in Ateneo would say that really land reform is a requirement for development or progress. And unless that happens, the traffic is just one symptom of this justice in the kitchen as well as in the city or the country. I'm not sure whether that responds to both your questions.
Actually, I'm quite curious about the last part of this question also where you mentioned airports as being examples of non-places. I guess not having any background in this class, it just seemed curious to me as someone having been through several airports, because it is the infrastructure that links places, and because it is the venue where people can feel either so much joy or so much sorrow as they come and go. So I'm curious about that, but maybe we can talk about that in another venue. We have time for one more comment or question. Yes, sir?
Hi, I'm Exil from the English department. About airports, Alain de Botton has written on the airport as a non-place in particular. Anyway, first, thank you, Momo, for the lovely talk. It's quite thought-provoking. Thank you for the movie and book suggestions. I have one for you. There's a reality TV series in the UK called Blood, Sweat and Takeaways, in which you take young Brits who love food and take them to certain countries in Southeast Asia, where the food that they like is actually produced. So say they spend some time in a Thai rice farm, they spend some time in Indonesian prawn farm, and live the life of the people who actually produce the food. I love the idea that you raised that we cannot think about the kitchen without thinking about justice. I'd also perhaps like to contribute to the discussion by talking about Michael Pollan. He's an American author who's written several books about food. And one of the important points he's tried to make is that one of the reasons our consumption of food, at least talking about Americans, is out of whack is that we're not aware, or we're made unaware of how the food is produced. And he says that he cites a study that says that the greatest correlation between healthy food and healthy eating has been found with the preparation of food at home. So that if we want to eat healthy, then we should spend more time producing food at home. So the problem comes in when we rely on large corporations to do the cooking for us, and we bring all these health problems. And one more thing, perhaps the common theme in the talk, the large theme is the notion of disconnection, that modern life, including the way we design new spaces, has been a way of, whether we designed it that way or not, is that we disconnected ourselves from the earth, from each other, and from ourselves. And we can see this in our relationships with technology, our relationship with the environment, and in many other aspects of our existence.
Thank you, Exi. I'll be borrowing some of the books or videos from you. But in the documentary film Food Incorporated, that's what they're also saying. They're deliberately hiding things from us. There were sections that they were trying to interview the big food companies in the US, but they refused. But somehow they were able to sneak into the chicken raising companies, and you really wouldn't want to go to Jollibee or KFC anymore. But the question is, what else? What can we eat now? As I said, it can be depressing. It's a huge, we're up against something very huge. But I would like to think of little pockets of freedom and resistance. As I said, it begins in the kitchen. Maybe tonight you help out in the kitchen. Or when you go to the market, when I went to Rizal, I was so embarrassed. I looked at the names of the fish, and I think more than 50% of the fish being sold in restaurants, I don't know. The first time I've seen the name. So I don't have any connection, right? Much less with the fishermen and women who made it possible for us to eat fish. So I'm really focusing on, as as Exi was saying, on interconnectedness. Focus is about interconnectedness, is about belonging together.
And with that, I thank Dr. Barbaza again and everyone who contributed to the discussion. At this point, I'll turn you over to Ms. Abby Faves of AIS to close our ceremonies.
Thank you again, Dr. Barbaza and Dr. Kendra, for moderating our forum. And thank you to everyone who came. I know there's also a school forum currently going on now. So thank you for being here with us to talk about space and what's bagay. I think bagay tayo. Nandito kayo kasi bagay tayo. We thank, of course, the people who made this event possible. Our partners from IPPB Ateneo are being live streamed right now. But I would also like to take this opportunity to invite you to the succeeding talks. This is a sustainability lecture series. We have one every month, so I hope you can join us again as we explore more topics in sustainability. So please watch out for the announcements. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you learned a lot as much as I did today, and have a good evening.